In the world of modern psychology, there is a dynamic so hidden and destructive that we often mask it under noble terms like stability, reliability, or family duty. This is not overt abuse or crude neglect. It is a sophisticated, quiet exploitation, often elevated to the status of a virtue. Imagine a situation where, behind the facade of an ideal, socially approved couple, lies a silent, one-sided contract whose terms one partner never even signed. They simply accepted it as a given, obeying internal conditioning and societal expectations. This is the story of how a person striving to be a pillar of support, faithful and responsible, unknowingly turns into a long-term investment project, a sort of warranty for a prosperous, calm, and predictable future for someone else. We call this the retirement plan syndrome, or the human asset phenomenon. This is a state where your personality, your interests, your dreams, and your feelings are gradually pushed into the background, giving way to your primary and essentially only significant function: to be an inexhaustible, reliable, and unfailing resource. Let's dive into this scenario using the example of Brandon and Kelly. Brandon is a man of action, internal integrity, reliability, and discipline. His life is built on principles of creation, responsibility, and the protection of the weak. Perhaps there was instability in his childhood, or he internalized the provider archetype as the only truth. When he met Kelly, he saw in her not only beauty and charm, but also that delicate spiritual organization, that fragility that immediately appealed to his knightly protective nature. Kelly, possessing keen social and emotional intuition, felt in Brandon exactly what she perhaps always lacked: absolute predictability, the feeling of a stone wall. At the beginning of their journey, it looked like an ideal, harmonious puzzle. He gladly provides protection and support, and she bestows upon him admiration, attention, and a sense of indispensable significance. However, behind this external well-being and complementarity lay an almost invisible psychological hook. Kelly's subconscious, formed perhaps by anxieties of the past, fear of poverty, uncertainty about the future, or internal emptiness, chose Brandon not so much for the complexity of his inner world, the uniqueness of his thoughts, or the depth of his feelings, but for the material, social, and emotional security he broadcasted with his entire being. From that moment, Brandon, without realizing it, began a slow transformation in his partner's mind. He ceased to be a whole, changing, living person to her and became a strategic tool, an asset to ensure her life comfort, status, and psychological peace for decades to come. The intrigue and tragedy of such a union lie in the fact that exploitation here is never crude, obvious, or malicious. It envelops like a soft but thick fog, saturating every interaction, even the tender ones. Brandon feels truly important, needed, and fulfilled when he solves Kelly's problems, when he plans their joint future, when he takes on all financial risks and shields her from life's storms. He sincerely believes that this is the essence of love, male responsibility, and true intimacy. But the deep psychology of relationships suggests otherwise. If your value in the eyes of your partner is proportional to and directly dependent on your usefulness, on your ability to put out fires, bring in resources, and maintain a stable status quo, then you're in the trap of functional utility. In such a constructed system, Brandon is effectively forbidden to evolve, make mistakes, or change course. He is obliged to remain that same monolith, that very rock he presented to the world, and Kelly at the start. Any attempt by him to deviate from the intended, approved course to change a high-paying but soul-draining profession for one that is less profitable but meaningful, to go on a creative or spiritual search requiring time and internal strength, or simply to show a non-serious, spontaneous part of his personality runs into fierce resistance from Kelly, though almost always disguised as concern or disappointment. her deep, panic-stricken fear of losing a stable future, of the collapse of the security system she built, turns out to be much stronger than sincere empathy for his personal crisis, or his thirst for self-realization. The smooth, almost imperceptible transition to realizing oneself in this role often occurs not through words, but through silent signals from the body and soul. Brandon begins to experience chronic existential fatigue that even a long vacation cannot relieve. This happens because he spends his life energy not on his own life, development, and joy, but on the constant maintenance of another's psychological and material comfort. Like a battery, he works to power another's system, gradually discharging. Kelly, in this dynamic, acts as a passive but persistent consumer of his life force. She can be incredibly sweet, caring, and attentive to household details, but this care always has a specific, utilitarian vector. She preserves Brandon the way one preserves an expensive, reliable car or an important mechanism so that he doesn't break down, doesn't fail, and continues to perform his function properly. If Brandon falls ill or is emotionally overstrained, Kelly will certainly be the first to bring him medicine, cook soup, and ask him not to worry. But the motive will be not so much deep empathy for his pain and suffering as a unique individual, but anxiety and even irritation that her key, security guarantor is temporarily out of order and requires investment. This realization is the most painful, wounding moment for anyone finding themselves in such a role. It is a blow to the very core of self-esteem. You are valued not for who you are, but for what you do and provide. In psychological practice, this is often called resource vampirism, dressed in a beautiful, socially acceptable form of family idol. Kelly, often unconsciously, creates and maintains a powerful illusion for Brandon that without his constant efforts, without his sacrifices, their shared world will collapse. She subtly and constantly emphasizes his indispensability, his strength, his status as the sole savior and cornerstone. And Brandon, fueled by his ego, sense of duty, and childhood learned models, voluntarily and even proudly puts on this yoke which becomes heavier and more unbearable every year. He gradually stops being interested in his own once passionate dreams. He forgets what healthy risk, the excitement of learning new things, and simple spontaneous joy are. Because now he carries a colossal responsibility not only for himself, but for that carefully constructed image of the future that Kelly and often society drew in her head. He has become a hostage not of her love, but of her expectations and fears, and the price of this captivity is his own, unique, truly unlived life. Let's analyze in detail how exactly this fatal substitution of concepts occurs. In healthy, mature relationships, true intimacy is born from a mutual exchange of vulnerability. Partners can afford to be weak, confused, or unsure, knowing they will be accepted and supported. In the retirement plan scenario, the right to vulnerability is monopolized by one person. In our pair, Kelly, she is the one allowed and even expected to need sympathy, support, protection, and guidance. Brandon, however, is obliged to remain an invulnerable fortress. The moment he weakens his defense, takes off his provider armor, and shows his human weakness, fear, or uncertainty, Kelly begins to broadcast disappointment, coldness, or even panic. She fell in love not with Brandon, but with the image of the strong, steadfast Brandon, and a real, living, complex person with doubts and crises is essentially unnecessary and even dangerous to her. She needs a foundation, and a foundation, in her conviction, cannot waver, doubt, or change direction. This creates a huge emotional abyss in the relationship. Brandon, subtly picking up these signals, begins to hide his true feelings, his professional torments, existential longing, and fatigue so as not to destroy Kelly's fragile illusion of comfort and security. And at that moment, their spiritual and soulful connection is finally severed, giving way to formal, business-like cohabitation for the sake of achieving common but imposed goals: a mortgage, a car, vacations, status. The problem is exacerbated and legitimized by the fact that broad public opinion often actively encourages and praises this state of affairs. Brandon is praised by friends, parents, and colleagues for being a real man, bringing everything home, putting his wife on her feet, and providing the family with a standard of living that many only dream of. He is set as an example, but no one asks what internal price he pays for this. No one sees how, inside this outwardly successful, self-confident man, the inner light slowly fades, individuality extinguishes, and live feelings are replaced by the automatic performance of duties. Kelly, in the eyes of others, looks like the ideal companion, a wise woman who knows how to inspire her man to achieve great things and creates a cozy rear for him. But if we look closer, without the rose-coloured glasses of social stereotypes, we see that this is not inspiration, but a soft yet relentless pressure, directing his energy exclusively into channels that strengthen her personal comfort and security zone. Brandon, unnoticed by himself, turns into a highly efficient mechanism for processing his time, health, intellectual, and emotional strength into material goods, social status, and external well-being, which Kelly consumes with a sense of total, almost childish right, considering it the natural order of things. How do you recognize that you have fallen into this sophisticated trap before it is too late and your personality is completely dissolved in a functional role? The main diagnostic indicator is a chronic lack of reciprocity and balance in key matters of personal growth and support. If Brandon unconditionally supports Kelly in all her endeavors, courses, hobbies, career breaks for finding herself, gives her time, funds, and moral strength for self-development, but does not receive even a shadow of the same dedication and enthusiasm when he needs space for maneuver, time for his own crisis, or resources for a risky but soul-important project, this is a loud alarm signal. If Kelly's reactions to Brandon's attempts to assert his personal interests, not directly related to the common good, vary from manipulating guilt, "I was counting on you. What about our plans?" 2. Cold alienation and accusations of selfishness. This is practically a confirmation of the diagnosis. In such relationships, there is no healthy space for two full-grown eyes. There is only one hypertrophied, illusory we, which in fact serves the interests, ambitions, and fears of only one side. To exit this role, Brandon will have to perform a complex internal revolution comparable to a psychological rebirth. He will have to honestly admit to himself that his noble need to be needed and to be a pillar was masterfully used and turned into his main weakness, into a lever of control. He will have to face the bitter fact that he himself, with his over-responsibility, inability to build boundaries, and fear of conflict, accustomed his partner to such a consumerist state of affairs. Rebuilding such relationships is always accompanied by a painful crisis, similar to the financial default of an entire country. When Brandon first decisively but without aggression states, "Tonight, I will devote the whole evening to my old hobby, which is important to me. Even if it doesn't bring us money or prestige, or I need a week alone to think about my life," he will see the true, unadorned face of Kelly behind the social masks. It will be either the face of a frightened but ready-to-grow person who intuitively understands the justice of these words and is ready to learn independence and equal partnership, or which is much more likely at first the face of a bewildered and angry creditor who has been suddenly and insolently denied their habitual, legal payments of emotional and material interest. The path to recovery and building true rather than functional relationships in such a pair lies only through radical, frightening honesty and courage. Brandon must consciously and consistently resign his crown as a martyr and superhero, reclaiming his sacred right to ordinary humanity. This means risking an open, perhaps confrontational discussion of his deep fears, professional burnout, fatigue from the constant role of moneybag and stonewall, and, most importantly, his unwillingness to carry the entire responsibility for the happiness and stability of another adult alone. Kelly, if there is truly love for Brandon as a person left in her, and not just an attachment to his functions, will have to go through a painful but necessary process of psychological separation from her guarantor. She will have to learn to find support and confidence within herself. Taking responsibility for her emotional state and material well-being, stopping the habit of taking it from her partner as a given. Only when two people stand on their own strong psychological and life legs without merging into symbiosis can they truly and freely hold hands to walk together rather than one carrying the other. Everything else is classic, toxic codependency, where one person, albeit out of love, leans on the other, gradually exhausting them, depriving them of individuality, and eventually crushing them. It is interesting to observe how the energy and dynamics in such pairs change cardinally when the resource side, in our case Brandon, finally allows himself to be himself rather than performing a role. He suddenly begins to notice the beauty of life outside the context of usefulness and efficiency. His vital energy, which for years was spent on suppressing his own desires and maintaining another's peace, returns to him, giving unexpected strength for real rather than imposed creativity, for sincere hobbies and simple joys. Kelly, deprived of her usual external support, is forced to make a discovery. She finds within herself internal resources, strength, and talents she never suspected while in the role of the eternal princess in the castle. She may discover she is capable of being not just a consumer but a creator, not just taking but giving truly, without calculating benefits. This is the only possible happy ending for such a story, but it is possible only if both partners, having gone through the crisis, are ready to give up habitual, comfortable, but destructive roles for the sake of authentic, living intimacy between two whole personalities. If Kelly, faced with the new Brandon asserting his boundaries, is not ready to change the deep scenario and insists on returning to the old model, Brandon will have to make the most difficult, painful decision of his life. To continue being a retirement plan, a human asset, means consciously agreeing to spiritual and emotional fading, to a life in the role of a function, with the prospect of deep depression, psychosomatic illnesses, and bitter regret in the sunset of his years. To leave means to risk everything built over the years, a familiar lifestyle, a common social circle, perhaps material assets. No, this risk is simultaneously a chance to find oneself, to have a real rather than an obligatory life, where he will potentially be loved, valued, and respected not for what he can give and provide, but for who he actually is with his strengths and weaknesses, dreams and quirks. In psychology, as in life, there are no universal right or wrong answers, only personal choices and their inevitable consequences. And every person, in the silence of their heart, decides for themselves whether they want to be a living, breathing, feeling participant in their own unique life, or simply a reliable, predictable part in someone else's, albeit comfortable, security scheme. Concluding this deep analysis, it is worth emphasizing once again the fundamental paradox. True love is always freedom. Freedom to be yourself without fear of judgment, freedom to make mistakes and change, freedom to together reconsider the roots of your common path. If your relationship has quietly turned into a one-sided insurance company, where you are the sole payer of unbearable premiums, and your partner is the sole beneficiary living in the certainty that the policy lasts forever, then the time has come for a bold audit and a radical change in the rules of the game. True happiness and a deep connection do not require you to renounce your individuality, suppress your needs, and sacrifice yourself on the altar of another's peace. It flourishes where two independent people, standing firmly on their own feet, consciously and joyfully choose to walk together, not turning each other into crutches to maintain an illusion of stability, but becoming for each other a source of inspiration and mutual, rather than consumerist enrichment. If you feel this topic painfully resonates in your heart or causes an anxious recognition, and you want to deeper understand the mechanisms that govern our feelings, choices, and traps in relationships, I invite you to join our community of thoughtful self-discovery. Subscribe to the channel Psycheria, where we weekly reveal the most complex and tangled scenarios of human relationships, analyze archetypes, traumas, and the games we play without realizing the rules. Here, we together learn to see the bitter but liberating truth behind the facade of social habits and family scenarios, find the courage in ourselves to build healthy boundaries, and gain the strength to build a life based not on fear and duty, but on sincerity, deep respect, and true reciprocity. Remember that the first and most important realization is already a powerful step toward inner freedom. And your happiness, your self-realization, and your whole personality are not something that must be earned daily through hard labor for others, but something that unconditionally belongs to you by right of your existence in this world. Start small, allow yourself to be.